Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Randy Owenby, and I'm the Vice President of the Feminist Majority Leadership Alliance, and I'm so excited to welcome and introduce the members that attended the National Young Feminist Leadership Conference. They received this position based on their merit as a feminist, I guess you could say, and their willingness to do good work on campus, which they're already doing. So I'm very excited that this group got to come with me to this conference, and so they're going to tell you all a little bit about the conference or something that they learned from the conference. So yeah, our first person is Catherine Travis, so if she wants to come on up.
Hey y'all, I'm Catherine Travis, as you just heard, and I'm actually the secretary of the Feminist Majority Leadership Alliance here on campus, and it's been one of the best positions I've ever held. It's changed my life, and this conference was a very life-changing event because I had the opportunity to learn several things that didn't even cross my mind, and I got to meet all these amazing feminists of all different gender identities, expressions, ethnic backgrounds, class distinctions, and it was really just a wonderful experience. And one of the seminars I'd like to talk about that I attended was the Rape is Rape workshop. And the reason I thought this was really important and I wanted to go is because, as we know on college campuses, comparatively to the rest of other groups in society, we have a huge problem with sexual assault, harassment, all forms of just even things like stalking is just a huge problem. So I attended this workshop, and some of the things that I learned was that a lot of other people from other campuses across the country stood up and was basically like, here's some of the things we've been doing. In addition to the greats, there were survivors on our panel that basically talked about their experience, how they're working to fix things on campuses, like what they learned going through the justice system. And here's some things I learned. Some of the people, after we went through Title IX, the Clery Act, some really important legislative moves that have been put in place to protect campuses that unfortunately a lot of campuses are failing to enforce, that it's really important to know those, enforce them, and be very aware of what is working and what isn't working on your campus as far as your administration goes. Also, what was really amazing about that workshop was a lot of male-identified individuals actually stood up and said, one in particular was on our campus, what I'm involved in is I teach healthy masculinity. And that has been really instrumental in making a better campus environment between men, women, and other genders, is teaching healthy masculinity, respect, and beginning this at freshman orientation. That was key. That as soon as you enter the university, you should know what the university's stance is on respect, consent, harassment, assault, what the policies are, what situations are okay, what situations are not okay, and displaying that in a very visual way to very young students. So some of those programs are Green Dot, CISA, Step Out, and the programs are basically designed to teach everyone, not just men and not just women and not just people of other gender identities, but everyone to identify signs of things that are and not okay, what consent is, alcohol and drug education, and how those play into assault. And those were really key, and I thought they were really wonderful ways of actually going at the problem at all sides and teaching people that this is a natural problem that can affect anyone, not just women, anyone. So that was one thing that I thought was really awesome, that other people on other campuses these were just students, not even administrators, students were putting this into effect. Also, we learned a lot about how to talk to the administration, how to deal with the administration if the administration had failed, getting everything in writing, knowing where to report, knowing what resources exist on campus, whether you have a women's center, whether you have sexual assault crisis centers, things of that nature, and learning where those are, what they do, what their limits are, and maybe expanding them or getting them if you don't have that. So, are there any questions like anyone has? Okay.
If you can't think of one right now, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So.
Okay. But as far as it goes, I think the survivor inclusion was wonderful because we actually had these two amazing women who stood up and were very comfortable about sharing their story and said that they were strong enough and to overcome this and to get people to speak out and talk to the people on your campus, make them know that your feminist spaces are very safe, inclusive spaces, and that to come together and be able to help one another is important, that you speak out or you talk about it, or even if you just take activist measures. So that was what I learned from NYFLC. Thank y'all.
Up next we have Chloe Connor.
Great job. I'll give you a 1 minute warning if you're starting to go over time, okay? Okay.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I want to talk about one of the workshops I went to, and it was called Defending Your Local Women's Healthcare Clinic. And I thought it was pertinent to this campus because our organization is showing a documentary called After Tiller, which was about a late-term abortion, or one of the last late-term abortion doctors who was murdered, and it really emphasizes the need for women's healthcare clinics. And on my panel were some students who initiated action for training and protecting their local healthcare clinic, and just some really authorities in the field. And I guess not many people know that intimidation for healthcare clinics are increasing more than ever before. And what was really emphasized in this workshop was clinic defense, and that's escorting, legal observation, and support for them. And back to the late-term abortion state, less than 2% of abortions are late-term, and almost all of them are due to malformalities in the child, harm to the child and mother, and or they're being pushed to keep the child against their will. And most of the form of threat to the clinics are in form of protest in front of them, and they happen all the time at almost all of the clinics. And usually it's only about 4 people who are defending them, as opposed to like 30 to 50 people. And most people, and this is really scary because most people looking to get an abortion often don't see the other side of, like, they just see the negative side of getting an abortion rather than that they're not horrible people. So Dr. Tiller was the people, they are like, I don't know, it was called Operation Rescue, like the people who were trying to just wipe out the abortion doctors. They went after each and every aspect of his life. He lived with a U.S. Marshal for 2 years before he died, and he had a bullet-resistant car, and he was killed in church because it was the one place where he didn't have protection. So many women's healthcare professionals are under attack through every aspect of their life, which is very troubling. And the summer after he was killed, successfully, this organization, I guess it was called Operation Rescue, like they wanted to resurface this movement and go after other doctors, and they called it the Summer of 2.0, despite his alleged murder. And because technically they couldn't prosecute his murderers at all. So, and then in retaliation, pro-choice feminists made it the Summer of Choice instead, and made many actions to combat all this violence and stuff. And it was actually all of their actions did not. I guess the words they used, they shut it down, so it didn't really happen. So, and it hasn't happened again because people work at preventing it. So, yeah. So basically what it is like domestic terrorism. And some of the perspectives of some of the students who work to protect the clinics, they said that you learned non-engagement, so you just kind of like shut off what everyone's saying to you in order to, because everyone is just constantly harassment, and I know it's really hard to just go in and do that every day, but it's so important because they're the only ones who are standing up for this cause. And yeah, and they also talked about some training that you just need to communicate with your local clinics and see if they need a healthcare group, and there's organizations that can help you train to be well equipped to do so. And yeah, and they said that it's a huge impact to have a friendly face in something that is so very important and difficult. So yeah, I mean, that's a very important thing that I never really saw put in action. I don't know, it made me want to think about local healthcare clinics in Tennessee, because I'm not really sure, I haven't really heard of any organizations that organize to protect their clinics. So it made me want to look into that. And yeah, good information.
Hi, I'm Melissa McElroy. I'm a freshman and a political science major. And so I'm like a huge nerd for like public policy and stuff like that. So it was really great to be able to go to DC and learn about specific policy issues. So I went to a session on state ballot initiatives, which was really informative. It went from more general to more specific. So they explained to us that there are different types of ballot measures that are put for voters to decide. There's initiatives, which are put on the ballot by citizen petition, and then there's referendums, which are referred by the legislation. And all of these are only at the state and local level. So historically, ballot initiatives were introduced by the progressives. The mass voter participation was seen as a solution against strong special interests. So it's an attempt to get the people's voice into the government in a more direct way. In a more modern setting, feminists have fought against anti-gay and anti-abortion ballot measures, basically anything you can think of. So whether you're fighting on the offensive or the defensive, working for or against these ballot measures build your organization, and they can make you stronger locally, which is nice. So to be successful in an attempt in some sort of campaign for this legislation, you have to mobilize women voters. You need to get adequate funding, which can be the hardest part, and you have to have really strong grassroots support. So currently we're seeing a lot of attacks with these ballot initiatives on voting rights and workers' rights and women's health. There's a lot of anti-labor, like removing tenure, removing collective bargaining, and attacks on pension. In terms of voting rights, sometimes these things are used to start voter ID laws, or on the positive side, to increase early and extended voting. So recently, a 20-week abortion ban was defeated in Albuquerque. So it was a ballot initiative that was actually on a municipal level. So that's how local these things can get. So up this year, there's some pretty interesting ballot initiatives. Colorado is doing a personhood bill for the third time. But this one changes the state criminal code to include fertilized eggs. So it's a little more thorough than they have been before. They've been unsuccessful, so they're trying again. North Dakota also has a personhood thing coming up, but this is actually legislative referral. So their state government introduced this personhood legislation. And so it's so expansive that it impacts birth control, in vitro fertilization, and end-of-life care, which is something that I never really think about with a personhood measure. So Locally, Tennessee has a very interesting ballot initiative this year called Amendment 1, which says that it's going to be added to the Constitution if it passes, and says that nothing in the state constitution guarantees the right to an abortion or to funding for an abortion. And so the reason this is happening is because in 2000, the Tennessee Supreme Court upheld stricter privacy protections in the state than the federal government mandates. And so the idea was that abortion is protected and that undue restrictions on abortion are also protected, which is why we're sort of a safe haven for abortion in the South. And so it changes the Tennessee state constitution to strip these protections by using very tricky language so that when someone goes to vote in a midterm election where they're already not paying a lot of attention, they might be misled. And so how we're working in the state, and we're working with FMLA to work on voting no on 1, is to build community action team groups. And so how it was explained by Randy, who was on the panel, is that the idea is to get like a really strong grassroots base of support so you can constantly increase your network locally, so you can speak to people on their terms since these are local issues. And just try and get people to register to vote, get people to actually go vote, and ultimately to have the result that you want. All right, thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Bren Dowdy, and I was one of the members from FMLA that got to go on this journey, I guess we could say, even it was very short. I'm gonna go in chronological order because that's easier for me. My first session was state attacks on reproductive rights, and basically they had a representative there from NARAL, and they went through a lot of legislation and stuff like that, and there was very thorough, I guess you could say, but there were a lot of numbers thrown out there, and I don't like numbers, but these are kind of interesting. So according to the representative that was there, in 2010, 30 states passed anti-abortion laws, whether it be like kind of undercover or just straight up no. So in addition to that, there's been more anti-abortion legislation since 2010 than in the last decade, which is an insane amount. There's been 807 different types of proposals and legislation that has been thrown up in the air. NARAL actually gives us a grade book, and as a nation as a whole, we get a D, which is not good. And I know that Melissa said that we're a safe haven in the South for abortion clinics and stuff like that. Tennessee has an F. And I'm going to read some of the things on here that it says, the anti-choice laws. We have an abortion ban. Tennessee has an unconstitutional and unenforceable criminal ban on abortion. Refusal to provide medical services. Tennessee allows certain individuals or entities to refuse to provide women specific reproductive health care services, information, and referrals. So that's just an insane amount of negativity surrounded abortion and in the state. The next session that I went to the Crisis Pregnancy Center workshop, and there it was more talking about the crisis pregnancy centers around campuses and how they affect the people on campus, or just women and teenagers looking to find some form of safe haven and good information about what's happening. Actually, there was a group from I think this is an interesting story. There was a group from high school at this conference, and I thought it was very interesting that this one girl, she was talking about their sex ed class, and instead of somebody who was not required, who was supposed to be teaching sex ed, they had somebody to come in from a CPC. And they said to this group of children that they had this big paper heart, and they said, each time you have sex, this is what happens, and ripped the heart in multiple pieces and threw it on the ground. And all the children were just like, oh my gosh. But I was sitting there just like, ugh. The last thing that I went to was a special caucus, and that was actually my favorite. I got to learn about what feminism meant to different people. It was a wide group of people. We had people there of different ethnicities. different ages, and it was just really interesting to hear what each person had to say about what it meant to them. We had somebody there who was from a Mormon background, which is an extremely conservative religion, and she left the church with her husband, has 2 kids, is going back to school with a minor in queer studies. It's just an incredible story for some of these people who have made this long journey, and I am so glad that I was able to experience it with a lovely group of people, and thank you for your time today.
We are going to finish up our talking points with Tori Neil, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A for all of the people here. So if you have some questions, get ready.
Hi, I'm Tori Neil. So I really dove into feminism this year. I had no background in it prior. So this was like the first conference and the first experience with feminism outside of ETSU. So needless to say, we went into the first session of the opening conference, and Melissa and I freaked out and had everything that was said. It was like a spiritual experience. We were like, yes, why are we not speaking about this every day? Why don't we just have this conference every morning before school? So we were ready. We were ready to take over the patriarchy. We were like, where are they? We will fix it now. So that was powerful. And then I went to the prison reform session, so I now understand everything that's going on in Hillary's class, so I can have an opinion. So that was great. And I actually could critique, and I was like, yes, I have an opinion about this now. It was beautiful. And then I went to Building Momentum, about how if you're already established feminist group, what do you do now? And it was brilliant. People from the South were like, so we tricked all of our patriarchal friends to come to this meeting. She's like, we tricked them because we didn't tell them what it was, but then we changed all of their minds. So we got I got this beautiful experience and this beautiful idea, and they're like, in the South, just offer food and then explain. And I was like, I've never thought of that, but that's beautiful. It was really nice because it was great to hear that people had overcome struggles that I was personally dealing with, and that about how to not make people afraid to ask what feminism is, which is what I face personally. So it was nice, and it was nice to hear that other people were like, yes, it's a struggle, but it's fixable if you offer food, which is nice. And then I went to the special caucus for sexual assault survivors and intimate partner abuse. And I'm a survivor, and I don't talk about it, but I went, and in less than 5 minutes, we established this beautiful safe zone and support group. And one girl passed around a journal and was like, put your name down and your email, and we'll start this network. And we've been all emailing each other. And not only is it a support group of, I'm having a bad day, let me just tell you what's going on, and you don't have to explain anything so I understand. But we're like, what do we do from here? How do I make sure that this is better for other people? And how do I make sure that other girls don't feel like they're the only one that this happened to? And it's nice because we're actually helping this one girl who is going through the process of the media is contacting her because it was 2 basketball kids and nothing was done, and she doesn't know what to do. And she's like, I want to do something. And we're it's just nice and support group, and it's kind of beautiful to be here are all these different schools across the country, and I need help, and everybody's like, yes, we're gonna help, we're gonna affirm you, we're gonna be there, whatever you wanna do, but I'm gonna support you in doing it. And it's really nice and beautiful. And I guess the one story that I wanted to share from that is that there were 2 high schoolers there, and they're like, we self-identify as survivors, and we want to do something. So you had all these college girls crying in this one little room because these high schoolers were like, here's what happened, and we're ready to change the world, and it's gonna be better before I get to college. So we all cried, and it was a moment, and it was beautiful. And it's just really nice to hear that high schoolers know about this and understand and are informed and want to do something, because in high school I had no clue. I didn't know what was going on. I wasn't sure what feminism really was, and I thought that it was just sexual assault was a thing that happened that you didn't speak about, you just kept it to yourself and you dealt with it. But it's really nice and empowering to know that girls are like, no, this is a thing and it happens and it's bad and we need to fix it. So that was my experience, just knowing that that we are reaching other people and that it is progress and that people do know and people do understand. It was just really empowering and uplifting to know that there are other feminists and it's a big world and we will change it and we will go get the patriarchy today, because that speech, y'all, I'm serious. But that's all I have to say, so thank you.
Great. So now we're going to open it up for Q&A, and you're more than welcome to ask any of the members questions about what they talked about or about the conference itself, maybe how to attend or anything like that. So you just feel free to ask.
I just want to commend all these presenters for pulling this together in such a quick turnaround. They just got back Sunday night, okay? And they were on schedule to do it today, so congratulations.
Well, I've got a question for anyone that attended. What was the percentage of college students versus high schools?
I think there was only one high school group there, so it was mostly college.
And what state are we talking?
Oh, with the high school?
They were from Ohio.
Oh, really?
Really?
Oh, yeah, there are people.
Would have thought Maryland or Virginia.
No, there are people there from California.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but the high school is what?
Oh, the high schoolers were from Ohio. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not what I was doing in high school.
I have a question which I'd like to see this several of you talked about the initiatives that are going around. Some of you were talking about Operation Rescue. I keep getting these emails, I don't know if everyone else has heard about this, but because they have failed at closing down some clinics, there are movements now to start legislation where they're temporarily shutting down clinics all over the country because of building codes and all of these really completely obscure things that have nothing to do. I mean, they haven't been successful.
Oh, they have been successful.
Well, I mean, they haven't been successful in some of those other ways, so there's all these new movements, and I'm getting this material every week and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not hearing as much about this, like what, requiring them to completely redo their entire building.
This is why Texas now has what, are they down to 3? Or is it, I don't know, Texas is down to much. Yeah. They've lost like 3/4 of their abortion clinics in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And how about Mississippi? Is there one left in Mississippi at all?
Yeah. Well, even in North Carolina,
and North Carolina.
A couple of years ago was a blue state.
It's called, what's TRAP stand for next?
Targeted regulation abortion provider, targeted regulation of abortion providers.
And the size of hallways.
Yeah.
How many parking spaces you have.
Or they have to be able to send you to a hospital within a certain area, and the hospital has to accept you, and if they don't, you just have to shut down.
Absolutely, that's a new strategy.
And Tennessee has the one where any provider has to have, hospital access. And that shut down one in Knoxville.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a new strategy, these arms that are.
It's been going on for what, maybe 3-4 years?
At least it's the midterm elections.
Yeah, basically since 2010.
Since 2010?
I have a question. You mentioned the numbers, the increase in abortion action and legal and the states and government in the last few years compared to the last decade. Why? That just intrigues me. Why is that so? What has been happening? Why is it so much more on the radar? And
I actually have no idea. I would assume people are just becoming more outspoken about how much they dislike things, and they just want to be angry about it and make things more difficult for people that doesn't even pertain to them. So I really have no.
because it was difficult, and then abortions became easier, right? 70s, 80s, wasn't it?
Yes.
60s, 70s.
I mean,
And now there's more restriction, is that right?
Now, there are certain Supreme Court cases since the 80s have chipped away at the Roe decision. But just why in the last, I don't know, is it because so many states now have Republican legislators?
That's what I was going to say, because Obama got elected in 2008, then in 2010, when the midterm elections came, there was sort of a conservative backlash, that's when we saw the Tea Party really kick it up a notch, and so they flooded the state legislatures, here included, with these very, very conservative Republicans, and so that's why, like Bryn said, since 2010, these have just taken off exponentially. That's definitely part of it, especially on the state level.
I think the Tea Party is probably more the reason than anything else is. They're very vocal, they're very large now compared to what they have been. And I was saying, you're thinking, I'd be willing to bet you, because let's face it, that's when the Tea Party got really strong.
Right. Yeah. Right. It seems like it does come in waves. There's always.
It does. That's the one good thing about it.
It's action and a reaction.
I was sitting here thinking, 10 years ago this month in April, it was 2004 in DC, there was the March for Women's Lives. And it was the biggest, they won't actually publicize it, it was the biggest gathering ever.
And you know how much publicity it got? About this much.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it was the kind of thing.
Did you go?
I did. And oh gosh, it was just incredible. But I just kept thinking, it is time for another, because there hasn't been one on that scale. And I don't know if then there needs to be another backlash to what's happening. But I just kept sitting here thinking, yeah, I haven't heard of one on that level that needs to maybe.
Well, the North Carolina march was actually really, really huge, but once again, it got no publicity at all. Because it was huge.
Just a month.
Yeah, something like that. And
I would also like to add to that question that I definitely agree with Melissa, and I think to kind of like go along with that, I think recently we've seen it, feminism comes in waves. We've seen a huge surge of women saying abortion is not a taboo thing for me. I had one, 1 in 3 people have one, well, okay. But, so I think with that saying, people are coming forward saying yeah, this is something that women deserve, this is something that I deserve, this is something that we really should be talking about. So I think in a counterbalance to having a really, really conservative kind of legislative statewide and kind of on a broad base is kind of this resurgence of pro-sex feminism, perhaps, or just being willing to take that taboo away from talking about it and having these open conversations, kind of like we're having right now.
Thank you.
So I just have a general question. I'm curious. There seems to be something going on with the Crisis Pregnancy Center's families inroads into high school sex education courses. Because that's the 3rd anecdotal story I've heard in the last couple of weeks about this. And so in addition to that, the thing you mentioned about the heart and the pieces, right? My partner, who is teaching in the short women's studies section, was telling me recently that probably 1/3 to 1/2 of her class in their discussion about virginity were using that metaphor of so we've been told that if you have sex, you give away a piece of your heart, or you lose a piece of your heart, or whatever, which seems to be intimately related to this narrative that the CPCs are providing in these sex ed classes. So I'm just curious if anybody has any sort of more background information on what's happening there.
I had the Just Wait program at my school, and Knoxville, when I was there my senior year, it became a really big deal for sex education because we had Just Wait, but we also had Planned Parenthood's peer educators come and talk. But our school forgot to hand out the waivers for parents to sign. So the students who didn't want to hear about condoms heard about condoms. Our parents sued the school, Planned Parenthood, the school board, everything. So it was students going to school board to protest it, and how it was presented as an argument of well, people should know all options, especially the Just Wait option, and presenting as shouldn't we provide students with the healthiest possible option, as much information on the healthiest possible option. And they present it in this way of well, we're just trying to give people options. But ever since that, sex education has been a really big big deal to me. I've been to one national conference focusing just on sex ed. I've heard the heart metaphor, I've heard the tape, I've heard the pie, I've heard the chewing gum. I've heard a lot of stupid stories. And the thing is, they're focusing, a lot of them, on women instead of men, about women's entire value being placed under sexuality. Like, as I remember my sex ed, we were separated by men and women, and the girls in my class, we were told the pie one, where you're a pie, and every time you have sex, you give away a piece of your pie, and what pie will be left for your husband? You should think of your husband every choice you make, your future imaginary husband, because don't forget, you're all straight. And I asked, like, my friends who are guys, they weren't told that. And so it's all about devaluing women and their sexuality and shaming women for any choices they make, because it's not the choices these other places you make. But I found that most people I know in Tennessee who had these CPC places come in and talk to them.
Didn't Knoxville have a thing about, well, since they kicked out Planned Parenthood, didn't they also have to kick out the
Yes.
CPC
They
as
kicked
well?
out everything.
That's what it has to do with the law, the gateway sexual activity, the sex ed law, the really inane law that they have, made it dangerous for anybody who isn't already an employee of the school system to give sex education. So I guess they're kicked out now.
Yeah, both are kicked out, and now it's gym teachers teaching it. And how the gym teachers do it is they show graphic pictures of how it affects the body, and they say, abstinence is the #1 thing, and I guess you should use a condom if you could. But it's like a really, really
So it's really rudimentary and.
Yeah, and with the Gateway Sexual Activity Bill, Tennessee is the worst state in the nation for sex education, and certain anatomy textbooks had to be removed from the schools for promoting gateway sexual activity. Gateway sexual activity is the bill where if teachers say it's okay for students to hold hands, suspended for promoting gateway sexual activity.
But I thought you said the teachers were protected. The teachers were protected.
No, teachers are not protected in the state of Tennessee. In the state of Tennessee, teachers can still be fired for immoral activity. And immoral activity is not
limited to their own behavior, like talking about it.
It could be talking about it or anything else that comes within that framework of what is moral versus what is immoral in the eyes of the law.
And the other thing that Tori Neil mentioned about the situation in Knox County, I think, and I might be confusing perhaps, is that after they kicked out all of these, they sent no more outside speakers, they hired a sort of point person. The county hired a sex ed point person who was a former employee of CPC. So when I'm like...
But she said luckily was a former employer of it. I'm just adding the wording, that is right. But I'm thinking they could have hired some ding dong.
But they're hiring, they hired somebody from the crisis pregnancy centers.
That's likely to be a ding dong.
Yeah. Well.
So then like, what I'm wondering is what is happening strategically in terms of the inroads that the CPC is making with like the school board, the counties that are responsible for these decisions. Right, because there's obviously some sort of like networking that's happening there. That's very strategic.
I have an anecdote from Carter County. There's, I guess you call it a CPC. They give away baby clothes and stuff like that. They also have offered their space to an ecumenical charity thing called Food for the Multitude, where several churches contribute in fixing meals every Saturday. And so that's inroads too, that they've made themselves, they've sort of increased their network. And so it didn't have anything to do with local government, but it does have something to do with the local.
Well, did you all experience new relationships with other states and folks like that?
Everyone was so nice.
Great.
So nice.
Did you find one of the things that it seems always happens when I go to conferences or workshops, I always come home with really good ideas about things that we can implement on our own campus. And I wonder if you brought any ideas home with you about things other college students are doing that you would like to implement here, or initiatives that you'd like to start up. I know that you met a lot of high school students, things that they talked about that you'd be interested in starting up.
I think
I think one thing in our in the CPC session that I went to, they were talking about the CPCs near campus. As I stated before, we have one really close to campus as well. And whereas we haven't personally dealt with any outspoken issues outlashed towards us as a group, the other campuses have, because there's coupon books about talking about it, and they pay a little bit extra to get it figured. So as soon as you open the coupon book, it's right there, so that people will see this false advertisement. And I don't know if ETSU has a coupon book or not, but I think they advertise. They do. They advertise in the newspaper.
You want to define CPC in case somebody.
Oh yeah, it's a crisis pregnancy center. I'm sorry.
Which basically, yeah, explain what
Crisis pregnancy center is. It's not an abortion clinic. It's basically, is it funded by the state? Essentially is funded by the state, and mostly private.
They're allowed to get state funding.
They're allowed to, okay.
The Memphis Planned Parenthood had all of their state funding removed and given to a CPC.
And they just essentially pass out false information about pregnancy and abortions and stuff like how abortion can lead to suicidal tendencies and just really wrong information. But I think if, I'm not trying to share this, but I think like the other places, they're putting signs up around their campus and they've photocopied the coupons or whatever's in the newspaper and put it up on campus and saying this is not an abortion clinic, so that people know that it's not a safe haven for people who are seeking correct medical information. And I think that is something that we should look into doing possibly.
I had a follow-up question because I was thinking about, I think it was Chloe, she was talking about that there are a lot of places that are trying to get men's campaigns, men encouraging nonviolence, things like that. I'm fairly new to ETSU, so I don't know, is there something like that here? Is there a possibility for one of those?
Everybody's looking at Jake, so Jake, may I invite you?
I was at a campus where we had a fairly successful campaign with that, and I'm just curious if that has been a topic.
It's one of those things that has been kind of like in kind of this middle state of like there's obviously a need for it. There's also a want for it. I mean, FMLA has been really proactive in saying, as well as women's studies in talks with administration, other students, specifically campus programmers, that hey, look, this is something that ETSU is not necessarily hitting the mark on. We're teaching women not to get raped, but we're not teaching men how not to rape. And it's kind of like that twofold coin. We have talked with like the counseling center, specifically like with Oasis, but I think a lot of the kind of the barriers to that, I think, are someone to kind of be in charge of it, someone that has time to start new programs on campus, because I know that the state of our campus kind of in this, hiring freeze, not really bringing a lot of new people in. It's really difficult to find some solid administrative support to kind of form something like that.
It's logistical home.
Mm-hmm. So it's something that FMLA and women's studies have been trying to do, at least on a student level, like peer-to-peer education. We're actually kind of co-sponsoring like a consent workshop next week for ETSU Civility Week. And it's basically like, we're calling it like communication with consent, but a lot of kind of that dialogue is going to be geared toward this sense of like hyper-masculine culture on college campuses, rape culture, in addition to bringing like football back to campus, and
that's what I'm thinking.
A lot of issues that kind of make this need really great, specifically at this kind of time on campus. So I think it's just going to have to be a student initiative until we can find somewhere to actually house and kind of develop something like that from an administrative perspective.
There have been some stabs in the past on developing a male group that would go out and pretty much talk and discuss these issues with probably my guess is most of the time we start with the Greek community and your athletic groups. But that happened prior to, and I'm talking, this has been a while, because it was the previous counseling center director. And Steve Brown has been here quite a while now.
They actually tried to initiate a course, like a 1-credit course or something, but that didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, they did.
I don't know if it actually.
And then it never got off the ground. Yeah.
People have been trying for a long time and never really accomplished anything. If you have experience with
This is, like you said, this is the time to do it since football culture is coming, infrastructure for support is going to be necessary.
But again, we talk about academics and how high schools need to play an important part in that. I'm just wondering if there are any high schools that are working towards that type of education for males too, because that would seem, even junior high and high school, that would be, not in Tennessee, but are there any states that might be doing that successfully?
Because high school,
Not across the board.
Sports are so big in most towns, and the boys are just, idolized. And
High
that's
school,
just-
training ground for people to come to college and be hyper masculine.
Yeah. Yes. I will say that it is few and far between, definitely. But I just came from the National Planned Parenthood Conference, and so I got to meet some, right before I went with them. And so I got to meet some people who are doing similar work to what we're doing on their campuses, and they have spoken of men's programs, however you want to term it, for high school students or for those that are transitioning from high school to college, being available in very, very select areas, but it's by far not a widespread thing, and that's one thing that the Planned Parenthood, like the youth squad that is kind of like trying to develop, is kind of those resources for people entering different stages of their lives. So hopefully there will be some.
Like for freshman orientation?
That's what I was just thinking, that would be
yes.
great. Orientation, what a great venue for it.
I must confess my lack of knowledge as far as the depth that many of you have as far as women issues. But what I'm wondering is this. In the public arena, political arena, whatever space you might want to call it, it appears as though certain groups have made abortion the issue, and it's actually bringing some people together and pulling some people apart. I guess what my question is, in this conference that you went to, was there any discussion as to how women can take control of how to define themselves, their role in this political arena without having outside groups do it?
That's a really deep question.
I just went, I know there's a lot of conferences going on. I just went to the Southeastern Women's Studies Association conference, and I noticed there was 2 different panels which were discussing religion and these issues, coming to terms with pro-choice or pro-life or any of that within a religion. So I think there is some discussion of that, of how to label yourself, because terms like pro-choice or pro-life are just really weird defining concepts that people don't feel comfortable fitting under. So I guess trying to define that yourself within your own, I don't know what the word is, not labels, but experiences through religions. I think it's something that's growing. There's been a lot of discussion in the past year about the dichotomy of pro-choice and pro-life and coming up with new terms. And I think that is definitely progress in the right direction for how to define yourself and work without outside groups or outside ideas, I guess. I don't know if that's what you would do.
Well, that's part of it, but I think the issue is just so much larger than abortion, because if you look at women's issues, there are so many things to be discussed, and I'm just wondering, how do you bring those things to the table without them being, dismissed because of one group's perception of that this is more important than equal pay, than, you know, you can go on and on. So
You all went to sessions, I know, that were really directed at certain issues. But did you walk into one where that they just told you how you can change public and political policy as women as a whole? Did anybody ever discuss that with you all this weekend? They may not have. Were most of your panels student-driven panels?
Student-driven as in student attended, or student-driven as in student?
Student on the panels. Were all your panels students, or did you have special speakers come in?
It was a mixture of both. There were students, I sat on a panel, so there were students on the panels, but there were also people working in certain organizations for whatever the panel or for whatever the discussion may be about. So it was kind of like almost an even mix.
Okay.
Which kind of, I think,
I don't think anybody attacked your problem. Your question.
I think part of it is that this is a conference that does focus a lot on reproductive health, but in the past when I've been to the conference, I've been to sessions that aren't about that. But with FMLA, our two major umbrella organizations are Planned Parenthood and the Feminist Majority Foundation, and both focus a lot on reproductive health. So it's hard to not do a lot of events on that. But I don't think there's really a specified way of saying which is more important. The only thing you really can do is try to do a lot of events on a lot of different subjects. FMLA does about 20 plus events a semester, and definitely not all of them are on abortion. So that's how we try to combat it, I guess.
that's good.
And if you look at other sort of women's studies or women's and gender studies oriented conferences that are not sort of sponsored by, these parent organizations, there's a huge plurality of topics.
Okay.
Everything under the sun, really. I mean, you look at the conference program and you're dizzy. So the conference we were at, Southeastern Women's Studies Association, it's like that. The National Women's Studies Association is like that.
All right.
And I mean, there's also talk in these groups that we're going to that are focused on abortion about how these affect different communities, which I think is a really important conversation to have, to bring the multiplicity of these issues in. How does access to abortion affect people or women of low income? How does the issues of abortion affect different areas? How is this different for people who live in rural areas as opposed to living in metropolitan areas? So I think something really, really cool that I've seen happen at this conference, and you all can talk more about it if you have experience in it, but is that we are starting to bring those conversations into the conversations that we have about abortion or about XYZ to kind of show the layered and the complex kind of decision making and kind of the way that we advocate for these issues, kind of making it more accessible to people who need it differently, I guess you could say.
One of the things that I kind of want to follow up what you're talking about, the kind of the swing of the pendulum. When I was a graduate student, we were mobilizing for Operation Rescue. And right now it seems like things are at the policy level. So I'm curious to follow up with you, Melissa, on how you see women's issues. You talked a little bit about this being our policy person around the table. So how do you see women's issues coming across? What are the broad major issues at the policy level that you see taking place? Is it primarily abortion, or would you say there is a range of issues at the policy level related to women? So what's your perspective on that based on your conference participation?
I'm hesitant to say it's primarily abortion, but it's probably number one. That's, I think, part of the question here is why are we so focused on abortion? Because these policy attacks have been very focused on abortion, but also they did a really good job of explaining that there's a huge array of policy issues that feminists can get involved with. They spoke about minimum wage is coming up as a ballot initiative, and they're this is a feminist issue, equal pay is a feminist issue, even environmental issues, if you're into ecofeminism and also like LGBTQ like specific rights on a policy level. So I don't know, it's pretty multifaceted, but yeah, I think a lot of the focus is on abortion on a policy level, and that might be why it sort of trickles down to us and why like we focus on abortion and like why for me reproductive rights has always been like the issue because I see so much of it. If that sort of answers your question, I'm not sure where I'm going with this.
I think that it's, you know, kind of what you're saying, Melissa, is that a lot of the work that has to kind of be brought to the table at this point is reactionary because of how much has come down from the state legislature, that it's like groups like FMLA do countless number of events in so many different facets that involve just women's issues kind of in this broad-based concept. But it's like, if reproductive health and abortion issues aren't specifically addressed and kind of scoped in as a focus of the mission, then it's like it would, you know, it's easier for people to ignore those issues when those are the things that need to directly be addressed. I mean, Amendment 1 in Tennessee coming up in November, it's like there's only a limited amount of time to organize around different issues because this is so prevalent and is what's at stake right now. I think is a
Definitely. I think that's why a lot of like current feminism is defined by a fight for reproductive rights, because we're currently just like being crushed with these regulations, and so we sort of have to fight our way out of that before we can focus on like maybe more nuanced.
I would also argue that reproductive autonomy is essential to feminism. Talk about people, outsiders defining women. I'm sorry, we have millennia of women being defined as reproducers and as it being the duty to bring a pregnancy to term. And if women have any autonomy as human beings, they have to have control of their reproduction. And I think it deserves to be treated with importance.
Well, I'm not saying that that is not important.
It's just, I think that like you've picked up on a really interesting trend, and I think there's a lot of reasons for it, definitely.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank FMLA and the students who attended the conference for your great talks this afternoon and your participation and your work on campus, the activism that you are continuing to do on campus. We appreciate that very much. So, a round of applause for